What's up everybody, Jesse here with VMP Performance, and today we're going to show you how to install our fuel system on an S197 Mustang. Now this fuel system also installs on your S550 Mustang. We'll note the key differences here in the video, so this guide should be good for both S197 and S550. Let's go ahead and get started. Alright, the first thing we're going to do is remove our cold air intake. This is going to give us access to our fuel rails. Now we can mount our regulator and run our lines up top and then move on to the bottom of the car. Now if you have a Roush setup, you won't have these rails. You may need to replace the rails with rails that can accept an 8AN fitting. The VMP rails accomplish this for you. First thing we're going to do is disconnect the factory fuel line. Now this car has been sitting for a full day. I know there's no fuel pressure in it, but you'll want to cover this line so that you do not spray yourself with fuel. You'll release the clip, pull back on the line, and move it out of the way. Now we can remove this 180 degree. This is a 10AN on our VMP kit. Now that this is out of the way, we'll move over to the bench and set up our regulator. All right, we're gonna start with our air motive regulator, and we're gonna unwrap all of our AN fittings, our gauge. We're gonna get Loctite, super lube, a 7/16 wrench, and an 8AN wrench, as well as I'm gonna use a T55 for the plug and a 3/8 ratchet. We're going to take the extra O-ring supplied in the kit and stick it on this side of the 8AN to 8ORB fitting. We're going to lube up the ORB side and put it into the bottom of our regulator. This is going to be an 8AN. Make sure that is tight. Lube the second O-ring. We're going to take our barrel, screw that on hand tight. Now we're going to orient our regulator this direction, with this being the front of the car, the rear of the car. You're going to take the 8AN plug and we're going to stick it on the outside of the regulator. Make sure you lube that O-ring. I'm going to make sure this is tight. Now we can move on to our last two fittings. It doesn't matter which way these go, as long as the ORB goes into the regulator and the rail. Go ahead and lube the O-ring. Tighten that into the regulator. Now we can take our second fitting, screw it on. We're not going to tighten this until we get to the car. Lube the second O-ring. And we're ready to install it on the car. Once we get it on the car, we'll remove this plug with a 3/16 Allen and install our gauge. We're going to install the gauge with red Loctite because Teflon tape will be eaten up by E85 and other abrasive fuels. We're going to install our regulator into the end of our fuel rail. This is going to be an 8AN fitting. Once that is tight, we're going to turn the fuel regulator into the position that we desire and then tighten the fitting in the middle. Now we can connect our factory feed line into the regulator, make sure the clip is engaged and the regulator is finished. Before we move to the other side, we're going to go ahead and install our fuel gauge. Remove the plug from the top of the regulator. Now we're going to take our fuel pressure gauge, put a little dab of red Loctite on the threads, and install that into the top of the regulator. Take our 7/16 wrench, and now we can move on to the other side. All right, now for the passenger side of the rail, we're going to take this 180-degree fitting and our second 8 ORB to 8 AN. Make sure the O-ring is in place. Lube that up and we're going to insert that into the open hole in our 180-degree fitting. We're going to use an 8 AN to tighten that down. And now we'll install this end into the fuel rail, and this end will go to our new feed line. Now we're going to install our 180-degree fitting. You're going to want to angle this towards the top, so that way you have room to clear your heater hoses. Now that that is tight, we're going to reinstall our rail and move on to our lines. All right, now we can install our line, route it behind the supercharger into the driver's side fender and under the car. All right, now we're going to take our 91-inch line and we're going to route that behind the blower. Go ahead and go under your PCV line. Behind the blower. We're going to pull the length through. And we're going to attach this right here to the line that we just added. This is going to be an 8 AN. All right, now that that is in place, we're going to move to the driver's side of the vehicle. We're going to get the tire off, the fender liner out. We're going to route the line through the inner fender and under the car. Now we can remove the inner fender liner. Now that the fender liner is out of the way, we can go back up top, route our fuel line down, follow these lines under the car. All right, now we're gonna take the fuel line, we're gonna go over the brake booster and into one of the holes in the lower frame. Be careful not to kink this line. It is a Teflon coated line. We're gonna go over the brake booster. We're gonna come back and we're gonna put some rubber over this hose so it does not vibrate against the brake booster. If you don't isolate it, you will feel that in your brake pedal. Now that the line is routed, we're gonna go back under the car and and we're going to start routing the line and attaching our fuel filter. We're going to use a 10mm socket to remove this lower cover. Once all the bolts are removed, you give it a little tug to release the push clips that still hold it in. I'm going to take our fuel line and route it above the subframe, run it along these lines, and end up about right here. Once this is in place, we're going to go back to the bench, assemble our fuel filter, and then get that installed. Once that's installed, we can mount our rear line, and then we can attach our lines with our P-clamps. All right, now we can assemble our fuel filter. You're going to remove both ends of the caps. The fuel filter will come with it. On the other side, you will have a spring and an O-ring. We're going to go ahead and remove this cap as well. And now you also have a choice before you assemble. If you want to mount this to the rail with some self-tapping screws, you can leave these brackets on, or you can take them off and mount them with the provided hose clamp in the kit. We're going to go ahead and take these off for this application. And we're going to assemble our fuel filter. All right, now we're going to assemble our fuel filter. You're going to take the filter element itself with the caps. This cap is going to have the O-ring in it. We're going to squirt a little bit of super lube on there to help secure the O-ring. Into the groove. You're going to take the open end of the filter and put it against the O-ring. Go ahead and screw this into the filter body. This is going to be your outlet. So this is going to be from the tank out of the filter to the rails. We're going to take a little Sharpie and just put a quick little arrow so we know which way the fuel flows in this filter. Once that's in place, you'll take the spring, stick it against the magnetic end of the filter, and put the other cap on. Go ahead and take your wrench, tighten both ends of the filter, and we're ready to go. Now remember, when you can see inside of the filter, that is the outlet, and where you see the spring, that is the inlet. Now that the filter is assembled, we're going to install our two fittings. These are going to be 10 ORB on one side and 8 AN on the other side. Use a 10 AN wrench to tighten these down. And now we can install in the car. All right, now we can install our fuel filter. You're going to take note of the arrow you put on the filter earlier. This indicates the flow of the filter, so we know the fuel goes in and out. Use your 8AN to tighten the line. Of course, we'll go back and retighten everything when we're done. And then we will take our clamp from the kit. We're going to wrap it around the return line for the fuel and use an 8mm to tighten the clamp. You want to rock this off of the frame just a little bit to help with vibration. Once this is in place, we can crank down on this line. And now we can move to the back. All right, now we're going to move on to the fuel pump assembly itself. On an S197 Mustang, that's 11 to 14, we're going to have to lower the fuel tank just a little bit to be able to get the fuel hat assembly out of the back seat. Now there is an alternative. You can take some tin snips, cut the metal, bend it a little bit, and then get it out without having to drop the fuel tank. However, this is a very nice S197. We're going to lower the fuel tank. We're going to use a T50 Torx to loosen the straps. You don't need to take these bolts all the way out. We're just going to loosen them a little bit, and then we'll go up top and get the fuel assembly out. Now we're going to move to the back seat to remove the stock fuel pump. As you can see, Paul has a rear seat delete. Normally you would find the clips about here, and on the adjacent side, push those clips and remove your rear seat. Since Paul has this rear seat delete kit, it makes it a lot easier for us. Right here is your fuel pump. We're going to take this cap off, and then we can unplug the fuel pump. Release the lock. Set this aside. Now we can take the feed line off. You're going to squeeze the clip. And remove the line. You're going to remove the lock, and then you can squeeze the clip and remove the line. Set that aside, and then we're going to use a punch and a hammer to remove the lock ring, and then remove the fuel pump module from the tank. All right, now we are going to use our punch with a hammer to remove the lock ring. And once that is out of the way, we can remove our fuel pump module. Now that the lock ring is removed, we're going to slide this back and out of the way. And we're going to lift our fuel pump module up. We're going to lift it high enough so that we can achieve two things. We want to make sure we do not break the sending unit for the fuel level sender. And we also need to disconnect our crossover tube. The crossover, you're just going to squeeze the clip and remove it from the sending unit. Now that the old fuel pump is out of the way, we've gone ahead and drained our tank in anticipation for the E85. If you are switching fuels, now is a good chance to switch the fuels. If you are not, go ahead and leave the gas in the tank, and then we can install our new fuel hat. You're going to go ahead and take the fuel hat that is pre-assembled. Make sure you plug in your crossover. Make sure that is plugged in nice and tight. And then you can slide the hat into place. Make sure your O-ring is in place. Press the hat down into position. And then you can reinstall the lock ring. All right, now we're going to set up the fittings on the top of our fuel hat. First, we're going to do our feed line. The feed line is going to be this 90-degree fitting, 10 ORB to 8 AN. This is going to go into the side of the pump where it says feed. Go ahead and get that started. Then you're going to grab your 10 AN wrench and get that tight. All right, now that this fitting is tight, we can move on to our return fitting. It's going to be the 6 AN 90-degree ORB to 6 AN female. You're going to put this on the top where it says return. Use your 6 AN wrench to tighten this. Once that is tight, you have two choices for the EFI connectors. There is a 5/16 and a 3/8. If you have an S197 11-14 Mustang, you're going to use the 5/16 fitting. And if you have a 15 plus S550 Mustang, you're going to use the 3/8 fitting. Since this is an S197 Mustang, we're going to use our 5/16 fitting. Tighten that with our 6 AN. Make sure this fitting is nice and tight. Then we can attach our factory feed line to this return and put the lock back in place. Make sure that is tight, and then we can go on to routing our feed line. I've disconnected the return line so I can run our new feed line. We're going to slide this in along the same route as the existing line. You're going to push this to the front corner, and then we can go under the car and pull that down the rest of the way. Once we pull it down, we'll come back up top, connect it to our pump, reconnect our return line, and then we can button up this part of the lines, then we'll move on to the wiring. Now that this 8 AN line is tight, we're going to go ahead and reconnect our return line. Make sure that snaps in tight. Reinstall your lock. Now we can go back under the car, attach our fuel line, secure our fuel lines, and then do the wiring. All right, now we're going to take the line that we routed to the bottom of the car. We're going to run this over to our fuel filter. Screw that in, then we're going to use our 8AN wrench to make sure that it's tight. Once that is tight, we are done with our line routing. We're going to go back, attach our P-clamps, and make sure that our line is nice and tight up against the body so it does not drag on the ground. Now we'll take our P-clamps and our self-tappers from our kit. Now that this rear line is mounted, we're going to move on to the front line. Now that this is in place, we can move on to the next part of the install. We're not going to install our lower covers yet because we want to pressurize the system, double check for leaks, and then we can button it up. All right, now that the fuel lines are finished and routed, we're going to install our wiring harness. First thing we're going to do is take an 8mm socket and loosen these 3 nuts for the powers and grounds for the pumps. I'm going to take those off with the washers. Set them aside for now. All right, you're going to locate this section of your harness. You see 2 grounds joined together, 2 separate powers, and 2 smaller wires. These are going to be our fuel level sending unit. We're going to set those aside, and we're going to connect these 3 wires first. On the top of the pump, you'll see a plus, plus, and minus. That's exactly how you will hook up these wires. Positive, positive, and ground. Make sure your 2 red wires go to the positives and your black wires go to the single ground post. Put those in place. You'll replace the washer with the nut on each one. And we'll go ahead and tighten these with our 8mm socket. Once those are tight, we're going to move on to our 2 level sending pigtails. You're going to remove these nuts and washers. Once those are out of the way, you can attach your wires. You want to attach these in a way that they do not touch each other or interfere with the power and ground wires that you've already attached. Replace the washers and put the nuts back on. On this system, it does not matter which wire goes to which post. Hook them up however you wish. Replace those nuts. Then you'll use your 7mm socket and make sure that these are tight. Now that all your wires are connected to the fuel module, we're going to take our factory plug, plug it into our wire harness here, make sure the lock is engaged, then we can close this. Now we're not going to put this on because we want to pressurize the fuel system and verify for leaks. Now we can move on to our ground wire. We're going to attach this under this bolt. We're going to make sure it's a nice good ground. Then we can tuck our relays away and run our power wire to the front. All right, now we're going to take our ground from the harness and we're going to attach it to this bolt right here. It's a 15mm socket. Once that is good and tight, we're going to tuck our relays under the plastic cover on the side. And then route our harness across the back seat over to the passenger side. All right, now we're going to take the power wire from the pump module. We're going to route this under this plastic panel in the back. Through the seat belt. All right, now that the wires are run to the passenger side floorboard, we're going to remove the fuse cover. We're going to route this wire under this kick panel cover as well. Now that that is tucked up into place, we're going to go to the passenger side of the car, remove the wheel, find our spot through the firewall, and pull this wire through. Now that the passenger side wheel is off, we're going to remove this splash guard. That way we can get to the junction that we need to go through the firewall. Now that the panel's out of the way, we're going to cut this little piece of rubber off and run our wires through here. We're going to snip this piece of rubber off. Once that piece of rubber is removed, we're going to push our reach tool through that hole. This is going to push it into the passenger side footwell where we can grab our wires and pull them through the firewall. Now that the wires are through the firewall, we're going to push them underneath this harness and into the engine bay. All right, now that we're back in the engine bay, you're going to locate the wires that you pushed into the engine bay, and we're going to route those over to the fuse box. Once those are over here, you'll locate the ends of the wires, and then you'll grab the 2 inline fuses from your kit. We're going to open this cover. We're going to attach them to our power wire right here. All right, we're going to take these 2 wires, strip them back. Make sure you put your heat shrink on the wires. And then we can attach our fuses. Once both of these are crimped on, we'll grab our heat gun, shrink these down, and then attach them to our fuse box. Now we can wrap our loom back around them. Tuck these to the side, and we'll take a 10mm socket and attach them to the fuse box here. Reinstall our fuse box lid. Okay, close our fuse box. Now we can reattach our battery, prime the system, check for leaks, and set our base pressure. Now we'll go back to our fuel pump control module and put our jumper in. That way we can get the pumps running and check for leaks. All right, we're gonna lift our trunk panel up. Then we can disconnect our FPDM. Plug in our jumper. Now we can go turn the key on, which will activate the pumps, prime the system so we can set our base pressure and check for leaks. All right, now we're gonna have somebody in the car to turn the key on for us. It's gonna activate the pumps. You'll see the pressure start to rise. We're gonna adjust this to 55 for our particular setup. However, you will want to contact your tuner and see what they suggest for your car. Now that we're at 55, we're gonna take a look around the car, make sure there are no fuel leaks, and then we can turn the key off, reinstall our cold air, and finish with our install. All right, now we're gonna reinstall our cold air intake. All right, and now our install is complete. We can go back, reinstall all of our covers, and then hand the car over to the tuner. All right, so that's our install for our VMP plug and play fuel system for your S197 or S550 Mustang. If you're interested in this kit for your car, go ahead and give us a call at our sales and support line. Follow us on all of our social medias. Thanks for watching.